Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the Angular Lunch, hosted by Oasis Digital. My name is John Baur. I'm a developer here at Oasis Digital, also an instructor for Angular Bootcamp. I'm going to talk a little bit today about using RxJS to do some reactive programming in your Angular app. I'm going to do that with a live coding demonstration. So I've got this application that I started up. It's pretty simple. It just has a search input, and we're going to search Reddit for some images. So I'm going to search for dogs. We have a search button. It's going to hit the API, come back with some images. Pretty simple application. Let's look at the code at what this does so far. So right now we have a single component on the page. We've got a form control. There's a search function here, which is going to trim the value of that search control, and if it's not an empty string, go ahead and do the search. Our search service, I really wanted to start this talk by delaying talking about RxJS, but you really can't delay talking about RxJS. If you're working with an Angular application, they've put RxJS in this so pervasively, you really have to try to get away from it, and I wouldn't recommend trying that. So we're already seeing some of the operators here. So our service has a search function on it, which is going to construct this URL. We're searching the AW subreddit. If you're unfamiliar with that, it gives you cute pictures of animals. We're going to make an HTTP call to that URL, and then we're going to use the map operator. The map operator does is it takes the value inside an observable and returns you a new observable. It transforms the value and returns you a new observable with the new value. So this HTTP call is going to give us an HTTP response, and we're going to call map so we can just peel the JSON body off of that response. It's pretty standard whenever you use HTTP. I'm then going to call .map again, and I'm not going to go into the specifics for this function, but what this API does is it gives us back this big hairy object, and I want to just strip that down, turn it into an array of URLs. So that's what this big function does. I've thrown a catch on here in case for some reason the API was down. I could still do my demo, but I'm not going to go into that too much. What the end result of this is, by calling search, is I get an observable back containing an array of strings. These strings are URLs to thumbnails of images. So back in my component now, I need to consume that observable. So I've called search, and I assign the observable to this results property. And notice I'm not doing any type of subscribe inside my component. The place we do subscribe is in the template, actually. So I'm using the async pipe inside the template to subscribe to this observable, take the data out, and put it into this ng4, where we loop over the results and create a new image for each one. So that was a quick walkthrough of how I would make this, one way of making this simple search screen work. But I would say that the first thing I actually want to do with this search is I want to be one of those new websites. I don't want to have to type in the word cat, go over here, click search to see the results. I'd like it to automatically do this search and update my results based on what I type in that box. And here's where we start to really use reactive programming inside our app. The first place you can do that is with Reactive Forms. So I created this module by doing ng-new with the CLI. I created a new CLI app. And the first thing the CLI does is it imports the forms module. So it would look like that. Angular contains two different forms modules. This forms module is what we sometimes call the template forms module. It's one way of using forms in your application. The alternative is the reactive forms module, and it's a way of using reactive forms. One of the first things I do when creating a CLI project is I replace forms module with reactive forms. This gives you access to things like form groups and form controls, which we're using in our application. So on my component, I've already created a new form control. One of the properties of a form control is called value changes. And this gives you an observable to observe all of the changes typed into that control. So we're going to start out by making use of that value changes. So I'm going to say this dot search dot value changes. That gives me an observable. And every time I type into the control, it's going to pass a new value into that observable. So what I want to do is I want to take that value that was typed in and pass it on to my search, pass it into my search function. But with the search, I don't actually just want to change the value. I want to take this new value, pass it into the search, and get that new observable from the search. And that's the observable that I now want to operate on. So I'm going to use an operator called switch map. So switch map is a function that takes the value passed into the observable, and you then call a new observable on that. So here's what I'm going to call this dot search. Oops. I'm going to call ris.search dot and pass it that value. Now you notice I have an error here on switch map. This is because RxJS has tons of operators that you can use on observables. But instead of just making those all available to you and bundling that huge package of operators into your application, they've split them up so you can import just the ones you need. So in order to use the switch map operator, I actually have to write a line of code to add that operator to the prototype. Now this is telling TypeScript to actually execute that line of code, which is going to modify the prototype of observables and add the switch map operator to instances of an observable. So now I can call switch map on my on this observable. Every time a new value comes in, it's going to call this function, and the observable returned by search is now going to be the result of this function. So I'm going to get rid of this do search completely. I'll just comment it out for now. But I'm actually going to take the result of that. I'm going to take the result of this switch map and assign it directly to results. And so now, since we're already binding this onto the array, or I'm sorry, onto the template, every time I type, it should search and update my array. And of course, the problems of live coding is you always get something wrong the first time.
You can demonstrate debugging with do.
Yeah. This is a perfect, I did this on purpose so I could demonstrate how do works. So we have another RxJS operator called do. Do is for side effects of observables. If I want to execute a function every time a new value comes down the chain, but I don't want to manipulate that observable in any way, I can throw a do in there. And so here I can say .do, and we'll just do a console log. So now whenever there's a new value in the chain, we're going to call, it's first going to go through the .do, and it's going to console log it, and then it's going to pass that unchanged observable into my switch map. So now let's look and see. So I'm getting a new value every time, but for some reason my results are not being updated. So let's put another. Give me just a sec to step back and look at this code and see what was different. Search the value changes.
Check your XHR requests in the console.
Yeah.
See if ever. Oh, hey, yeah. It came back for you.
Well, the problem is Reddit.
Ah. So you see that eventually something came, the API was down, and it took a while, and I think what we're getting back now is my cached search. There we go, and now it's back up. All right, that was a fun distraction. The API went down for a second. I do plan on doing a talk in the future on error handling to handle this much better. But now you see every time I type a new character in, the array is refreshed. So that's neat. We have our form working reactively, but it's actually working a little too reactively. I don't want to send off a new network request every time there's a keystroke. And there's a couple reasons for this. The first is, well, there could be somebody on the other end of the server saying, this guy's hitting my API 20 times a minute. I'm going to flip the switch and turn that off so he can't do that anymore. It also raises the question, well, if I send off 4 asynchronous requests, what if those 4 asynchronous requests come back in a different order? I want to make sure that the last one that I got back is actually the last one that appears on the screen. That question is actually one we don't have to worry about. That's actually handled automatically through RxJS, or I'm sorry, through the HTTP service. So if I type in here really quickly, but you see these red requests here, might be a little tough to look at. If you have an HTTP request in flight and you're using the switch map to go get a new one, the HTTP service will see that and it'll cancel the last one that you did. And so only one will ever be in flight at a time. Okay, so there are a couple reasons why we don't want this to happen on every key press. So let's keep adding on to our observable chain. Once we start working with an observable, it's observables all the way. Luckily, RxJS is a very vast library with a powerful library with all these operators we can use. So I'm going to add a new one here called debounce time. And we'll go ahead and put a debounce time here. And I give that a number of milliseconds. And that's actually going to stop that observable chain and not pass any new values through it until 500 milliseconds have passed without a new value. To demonstrate that, I'll put another do down here to say after debounce. Now if I make my console a little bigger, you'll see that we got that do the first 3 times to display that there was a new value, but it didn't actually pass through that debounce until I had stopped typing for a little bit. And this only sent 1 request through. So this is one way to sort of filter our responses a little bit. If I go back and look at this though, I haven't completely replicated my search function yet. Before, when I was pressing that search button, I was trimming the value and making sure that wasn't an empty string before sending it on. Well, I want to do the same thing here. So I'm going to add some more operators in here to sort of mutate this value to get it in the state I want it to be. For that, I'm going to use 2 new operators. I'm going to use map, which we saw in the service. And I'm going to use the filter operator. So I'll go ahead and do this after the debounce. And I'll do a .map to say, take that value that was sent in and transform it to the trimmed string. So now the trimmed string will be passed on to the next function. Then I'm going to add a .filter. .filter is another operator that says execute this function. If this function returns a falsy value, don't pass the value down the chain. So anytime I have an empty string here, it's going to stop and not pass on to that switch map. So here if I type cat, wait, if I go back, debounces, but it didn't actually send that string to that empty string back to the server. Same way if I do this, and I look at my network tab for HTTP calls, if I add a bunch of spaces to the end, well, it's going to send it, but it's going to send the string cat. It's not going to wrap it with all those spaces. The trimmed value we sent through.
Permission to heckle?
Yes.
So you changed the value of that input by adding spaces, but the actual search value of cat didn't change. Is there an operator we can use to, only send it if that value, the actual resulting trim filtered version changes?
Yes. You know what? There is one. Yeah, go ahead.
It's called distinct.
I think it is called distinct, but this brings up there's an operator that I want to use, but I don't know what it's called. How do I figure that out? Well, there's a great website. The RxJS documentation. Let me bump this up a little bit. reactivex.io/RxJS. At the bottom of it, there's this really cool wizard. If you need an operator and you don't know what it is, well, let's see. I have an existing observable, so I'll click that. And what I want to do, I only want to do something if the value changed. Does anybody spot it?
Actually, I want to ignore values.
I want to ignore values that match some previous value. According to value or key or object, probably value equality, emitted just before the current value. You want distinct until changed. So I use this website all the time when there's an operator. I know that there's a way to do it. There's no way I'm the first person who wanted to do this. I just don't know what it's called. You can use this wizard. And so let's go ahead and add that one in as well. Distinct until changed. So put it in after the map. Is it just distinct until change?
You want it after the filter, don't you?
Because you want to filter out, like, if cat, no matter what kind of white space I put on either side. Yeah.
So you want to do it after the filter? Well, the filter is just going to filter out empty strings.
Yes.
So it really doesn't matter which side we put it on.
Okay.
So now if I do that and I come back here, let's do cat, clear out the network, put a bunch of strings on the end, and we don't get another call. So thank you. All right, so we've seen, we keep adding all of these operators onto the end. Sometimes your files will look like this. You have several lines here just adding new operators, and that's okay. It's better than calling one line that actually executes that actually adds hundreds of operators into your code that you don't need. So there's another thing we can do here, though. What we've done is pretty simple, but what if I want to modify the components? I guess I can get rid of that button here. Right now we've just been passing a search string to a single subreddit, getting the images back. What if I want to do something else with this? What if I want to, for instance, actually pass in the subreddit to search? So now I have two form controls on my page, and I want to respond to both of them. Now it gets a little more complex, but it's actually not too bad. So the first thing I'm going to do is start by adding a new control to match what I just put in my template. And now let's actually go ahead and chop some of this off. So I'm going to make a local variable here, and I'm going to call it filtered search. And I'm going to capture everything up until we do the switch map, because this is all specific to the control that I'm watching. So this is going to get all of the new values to the search. And let's just make a copy of that for right now to make a filtered subreddit. So I'm doing the exact same thing on two different form controls. What I want to do is react to changes to both of those controls. Man, what's the operator for that? Well, I have some observables to combine together. I actually want to output a value that's computed from the values of both of them, because what I want to pass an object to my search parameter that has the values from both the controls. So I'll call that, and I want to use the latest value anytime the source emits. So I want the static operator combine latest. And we could click in there to see, you can get more information on how this actually works. But I'm going to add the new line for combine latest. Combine latest is actually a little bit different than the operators we've seen so far. And it is in a different directory. So it's under add observable combine latest. Because combine latest is not an operator that you call on an instance of observable. It's something that you call on the observable class. And the way I'm going to use that is to call observable.combine latest. And this takes an arbitrary number of parameters. The first n parameters are the observables that you want to combine. The last parameter is a function to be called on the values of those parameters. So I'm going to pass it filtered search and filtered subreddit as my first two parameters. And then the last parameter is a function. The parameters passed to that function are the values from the two observables in order. And I'm going to use a little bit of ES6 magic here. You know what? Actually, I'm not. Let's not do that right now. Let's do one thing at a time. So I'm going to construct a new object with a search property and a subreddit property, assign the values, and the result of combine latest is going to be a new observable containing an object of this structure. And this observable is going to get a new value anytime one of these observables are passed a new value. So let's capture this in another variable. We'll call it criteria. Thanks, Michael. And we will assign this dot results so this dot results equals criteria dot switch map. So every time a new value gets passed into here, well, we now need to change the parameters that search accepts. Let's go into the search service, because we're no longer just getting a search value, we're also getting a subreddit. And we will replace this, since I'm using my template syntax. We'll pass that value into the string right there. And we'll just split this object apart to send in the correct data. Okay. So if this all worked, should be able to go back here now.
Pull out your subreddit.
Huh?
Subreddit first.
There we go. Or maybe I want to go to animals. And we'll search for pigs in that subreddit. What?
Yeah.
All right. We can continue doing more things with this. The other one that I wanted to show, and I don't know if I can actually demonstrate what's going on here, but a really nice one to try for things like this. Oops. is the retry operator. And again, this is tough to demo, but I can do a retry 3 here. And now if for any reason the site went down or there were any kind of error in there, it would actually, if we're in an error state when we get to retry, it's going to do exactly what it says. It's going to retry up to 3 times. After the 3rd time, it'll go ahead and pass that failure on. And again, I could add to this all day long, just adding new operators one at a time. But I think this gives a good idea of how you can start with an observable and then just keep adding operators to move down the chain, put your form into any state you want it, and really just use this reactive programming throughout your application. So, have any questions?
So is the combined latest waiting till both of those things fire, or is it like in that case where you didn't type in the subreddit?
It's waiting for either of them to fire.
Okay. Is there one that would wait for both?
I don't know if there is one that would wait for both.
I know there's a with latest that will only fire like when one or the other changes, like the last one on the list changes.
I guess you could do the combined latest and then filter
There is
after the
So
fact. Okay.
here is one thing to be aware of. Let's go ahead and default my subreddit. So it starts with this initial value of awe. And now if I search, I'm not going to get anything back. Well, what happened was value changes only fires when the value changes. It does not fire with the initial value. So let me put a do in here and see if, let's see, dot do. After combine latest. So yeah, combine latest, actually, that answered your question. It actually is waiting for both of them to get a value. So if only one sends a value, combine latest won't do anything. But this is a case where I have an initial value that needs to be sent through. I kind of wish that the form would automatically push that initial value, but what we actually have to do is add another operator called start with. And I believe start with just gets a single value, which is the value to start with. So I'm saying when you subscribe to this observable, first thing I want you to do is push this value. And this is going to be done one time. So now both of them have received a value. Any other questions?
I might have missed it because I came in a little late, but could you give a high level, what's the difference between switch map and flat map and map?
So the difference between switch map and map, and I think we actually use both of them in this file so I can show it off. So .map receives a value and it transforms that value into something else and pushes it into the next observable on the chain. Switch map is taking this function and saying, okay, take this value, now I want to call a function, or I want to do something, this .search is returning a new observable. So the result of this function is an observable, and I'm saying that after switch map, I want to take that observable that was called by the function, and that's the observable that I want you to pass to the next chain. So you use switch map when you're not just transforming the value, but when you're actually calling another asynchronous function and you need to switch onto that observable chain.
And then flat map would be?
I'm not familiar with how flat map works. Does
Okay.
anybody else here know?
I think Well, two things. One, I think that you mean flat map to merge map. But I think the
you're-
description that you gave for switch map is true of merge map. And in addition, switch map will kill old calls. And
That's-
merge map doesn't have that feature.
That's correct. Thank you.
Yeah, so you made the comment earlier about we didn't have to worry about the HTTP
Mhm.
request going. Is that the job of what SwitchMap is doing, or the HTTP service in and of itself?
So I believe it's a combination of the two. It's the fact that switch map kills the old observable, and the HTTP service says when this observable is killed, send a cancel request.
Okay, so there's some
And
sort of
so-
hook somewhere that you can tie into to say when my observable is being killed?
That would lead to that assumption. I haven't actually done that before,
Okay.
but I would say that the answer is probably yes to that. Anybody else? All right, if there's no other questions about this, I wanted to end this enough time so we could have just some open discussion here. So I guess that's all, and we'll open this up to any discussion.